For nearly 3 decades, the Greek world had been tearing itself apart. The Peloponnesian War, a grim generation-spanning struggle between Athens and Sparta, had bled the Hellenic world dry. By 405 BC, Athens, though battered and politically broken, still had the most powerful fleet in the Aegean. For 4 straight days, this fleet of almost 180 warships sailed out to challenge their Spartan enemies, daring them to fight. And for 4 straight days, the Spartans refused. Then, on the 5th day, a catastrophic lapse in discipline allowed the Spartan fleet to launch a devastating surprise attack. In a single afternoon, the Athenian Empire was annihilated. How could one of the greatest naval powers in history suffer such a complete and total defeat? How does an empire built on the sea lose it all in a matter of hours? This is the story of the Battle of Aegospotami, the naval disaster that ended an empire. The Peloponnesian War was more than just a conflict. It was a collision of ideologies. On one side, you had the Athenian Empire, a wealthy, democratic, seafaring power. On the other was the Peloponnesian League, a conservative, oligarchic alliance of land-based armies led by the famously militaristic state of Sparta. The war was a meat grinder, full of plagues, massacres, and shocking reversals of fortune. After a disastrous defeat in Sicily in 413 BC, Athens was on its knees, having lost tens of thousands of its best men and hundreds of ships. And yet, with incredible resilience, they'd rebuilt. By 405 BC, the war's final chapter wouldn't be written on land, but at sea in the narrow, strategic straits of the Hellespont. The Hellespont, what we call the Dardanelles today, was Athens' jugular vein. Through this narrow channel flowed the grain ships from the Black Sea, the lifeline that fed its people. If you controlled the Hellespont, you controlled the fate of Athens. And Sparta, after decades as a landlocked power, finally had a fleet that could challenge Athens for that control, thanks in large part to Persian gold. Commanding this new Spartan navy was one of the most brilliant and ruthless strategists of the age, Lysander. While he was a full-blooded Spartan citizen from a noble line, his family wasn't wealthy. This meant Lysander's rise came from pure ambition and cunning, not from privilege. He was a master of diplomacy and deception who forged a close alliance with the Persian prince Cyrus the Younger, funneling Persian wealth into the Spartan war effort. Lysander was patient, observant, and understood that you didn't always have to meet your enemy head-on to win. Opposing him was a committee of Athenian generals, including men like Conon and Philocles. They had a bigger fleet, about 180 ships manned by roughly 36,000 sailors. But Athens' leadership was a mess. Years of political turmoil, including the shocking execution of 6 victorious generals just a year earlier, had created a climate of paranoia and distrust in the high command. This toxic mix of Athenian overconfidence and internal chaos, up against Lysander's single-minded focus, was a recipe for disaster. Lysander made his move, sailing into the Hellespont and capturing the city of Lampsacus, a well-supplied port on the eastern side. This forced the Athenians' hand. Their fleet followed and set up a base directly opposite, at a place called Aegospotami, or Goat's River. And the spot they chose? It couldn't have been worse. It wasn't a real harbor, just an open, exposed beach miles from any town. To get supplies, the Athenian crews had to wander for miles inland, leaving their ships dangerously unguarded. What followed was a strange, tense daily ritual. Every morning for 4 days, the Athenians would man their ships, row across the strait, and line up for battle in front of Lampsacus, basically taunting the Spartans to come out and fight. And every day, Lysander refused. He ordered his men to stay put in their fortified harbor on high alert, but to never engage. The Athenians saw this as weakness, as fear. And with every passing day, they got cockier and more careless. After their daily show of force, they'd row back to Aegospotami, drag their ships onto the beach, and scatter to find food or just relax, their discipline slipping further with each sunset. During this standoff, an unexpected voice of reason appeared. Alcibiades, the brilliant but notoriously shady Athenian politician, was living in exile in a nearby castle. He rode down to the Athenian camp to warn the generals about their incredibly vulnerable position. He pointed out the obvious, the exposed beach and the terrible supply line, and urged them to move the fleet to the safe nearby harbor at Sestos. He even offered to bring Thracian allies to their cause if they just gave him a share of the command. The Athenian generals arrogantly shut him down. They were in command now, they told him, not some disgraced politician looking for a comeback. They were confident in their numbers and their skill, and they completely underestimated the silent enemy watching from across the water. Dismissing that critical warning out of pure hubris would seal their fate. But Lysander was playing the long game. While his fleet sat in port, his scouts were watching the Athenians' every move. He saw their routine, their growing carelessness, and the golden opportunity that opened up every afternoon when the crews left their ships. He had his own men stay on their ships, eat at their rowing benches, and be ready to move at a moment's notice. His entire strategy was built on patience, waiting for that one perfect moment to spring the trap. On the fifth day, the routine played out exactly as before. The Athenians sailed out, shouted their challenges, and got no response. They returned to Aegospotami, and just like every other day, the crews got off their ships and scattered to find their evening meal, thinking the day's work was done. But this time was different. Lysander had given his scout ship a special order. The moment the Athenians were scattered, hoist the shield. The signal to attack. The signal went up. Instantly, the entire Spartan fleet, which had been waiting in total silence, surged out of Lampsacus and raced across the strait. The Athenians on the shore looked up in horror, but it was far too late. There was no time to get back to the ships, no time to form a battle line. There wasn't even time for a proper naval battle. It was a massacre on the beach. Lysander's forces hit them from both land and sea, overwhelming the few guards left behind. The vast majority of the Athenian warships were captured right on the sand, completely unmanned. Of the 180 ships in the mighty Athenian navy, only about 20 managed to escape, led by the general Conon, who knew the fight was lost and fled to Cyprus. The state messenger ship, the Paralus, was sent to bring the terrible news back to Athens. Nearly the entire fleet was captured. Lysander took some 3,000 to 4,000 Athenian sailors prisoner. Then, in a final brutal act, he cited an earlier Athenian war crime and had most of them, including the general Philocles, executed. In one swift, shocking afternoon, Athenian sea power had been erased from existence.